Hey, and welcome into the Big Ten Huddle. I'm your host, JR. Got a lot to talk about. A lot to talk about going on in the Big Ten. Oh my goodness. The Sunday episode is jam-packed today with a lot of news, a lot of notes, a lot of little things here and there that I was like, maybe I could like fit this into one big segment, but nope, we're gonna talk about it all. So we've got Rutgers DC news going out there. We've got we've got Matt Rule. He's questioning if he wants to do his spring game anymore. We've got Minnesota's defensive line coach moving on to the NFL. Ohio State is losing their coaching staff, so they're all out of there. Not all of them, but and then we have transfer portal signings of Pat Coogan and Rocco Spindler to talk about, and Illinois with a huge recruit in Victor Singleton to talk about. All of that, and we will end the show by talking about our next coaches that will win the Big Ten title in their first year. I got my guy Zach Guggenheim here to talk about it all with us. Zach, are you ready for a jam-packed episode tonight?
I was told it was the off season.
Sometimes the off season has more news than the season, I'm afraid.
It's true. Isn't it true that you did better numbers in the off season last year? Of course, that was all when there was rumors with conference realignment, right? So
conference realignment always does better numbers than anything else. If you can ever get a conference realignment story going, go for it. But I try not to do that too much, but it is rather tempting sometimes because whenever you and I talked about a team possibly going to the Big Ten, it was like
UNC is going to the Big Ten. Oh my gosh, they're going. No, they're not going.
Yeah.
They're not going.
Utah's going to the Big Ten. It's happening.
You see how Utah was this year? That ain't happening.
Well, and I realized I put in one of my video thumbnails Notre Dame to the Big Ten, and I was just because Rocco Spindler.
I saw that.
I had people commenting and they were like clickbait, and I was like, "What are you talking about clickbait?" Like I literally put in the title like, "Is Pat Coogan going to Indiana or Michigan?" And then is Rocco Spindler a lock for Nebraska? Like that. How are you saying that it's clickbait? I literally talked about it, and then I looked at the thumbnail and I was like, oh yeah, that was probably a mistake by me. I didn't even think about it. I didn't even think about conference realignment. I didn't think about anything. All right. So, terrible by me for not thinking.
Yeah. It wasn't clickbait. It was just
it was dumb bait.
No, I was gonna say dumb. It was just like it was a lapse of judgment. Lapse of judgment.
Yeah. Lapse of judgment bait. We'll call it that. All right, let's see who's here with us early on. We always appreciate people who are in waiting. Billy Tuesday, evening gentlemen, evening Billy Tuesday. Thank you for being here. John is here as always. Says, I know we're here to talk about football, but that Luka trade still has me rattled. Not even 24 hours later. Zach, I'll be honest. I woke up this morning and saw that on my phone, and I was like, huh. That must be one of those fake like NBA accounts that Luka Doncic is going to the. And I don't follow the NBA all that close. I know what's going on because I'm a sports fan. But yeah, but I know Luka Doncic is much better than Anthony Davis. Like that, I know for sure. And so when I saw that, I was like, that's weird. But I didn't think much of it. Did you think much of it?
Is it sad that I'm about to say who the heck is Luka Doncic?
No, it's not sad at all.
That's. The NBA to me has become so like I just don't know much about it anymore. Like I think the last time I was genuinely interested in the NBA was the Golden State super team. And I hate saying that because like I've definitely heard I have heard of Luka, but I couldn't tell you who's better between him and Anthony Davis. So everybody talking about this, you know more than I do. Again, like I feel I don't know much about it. It seems like it was crazy. That's all I got.
It's definitely crazy. Definitely crazy. John says he's here for the Pat Coogan talk. Oh, don't you worry, John. We'll get to it. We will get to the Pat Coogan discussion.
That I know about.
Yes.
That was pretty good for the Hoosiers.
That's a great signing by Indiana. And then Caitlin A is here. So excited for about Singleton. Hope they keep him from flipping to a bigger school. Caitlin, thank you for being here. I don't know if I've ever seen a comment from you or a chat from you. Thank you for being here. Yes, we are excited about the Singleton commitment as well. I think it's a huge piece for Brett Bielema, and I think it's a major statement for their program as well. We'll see. There definitely is some possibility of a flip there later on, but I mean, if there's any team that is rising kind of in the recruiting right now, it seems to be Illinois. So yeah.
Is it me, or is Illinois becoming kind of like a hot spot for defensive backs? Like I
Yeah,
feel like the
because Aaron
past,
Henry is there.
yeah. Well, I mean, you think about since 2021. I know people were pumping up Ryan Walters. We know how that worked out. Sorry, Purdue. Um, but it just seems like they keep churning out like great to elite defensive backs. And I think that might have something to do with Singleton picking Illinois. Like this is a
Yeah.
great pickup for them. Um, and to get them out of Ohio, I don't know if Ohio State was gunning for them. They should have been if they weren't. I mean, all the crystal balls were going in for Ohio State. So for Illinois to come out with the dub on this one is pretty awesome.
It is. It is good for them. So we'll break it down a little bit more later on. I think we'll probably hit that about the 30, 40-minute mark. But we got some other stuff to do. So look at, oh, there we go. Terry. Hey, clickbaiters, keep underestimating us. Thank you, Terry. Yes, thank you for being here. Clickbaiters. And Dave is here with us. Said I haven't pay attention to the NBA since the Detroit Bad Boys. I do feel like there's less drama now. Like there was kind of more drama around the NBA when I was growing up, but it seems like kind of a friendly, like hey, I'm gonna rest this day, you rest that day type of deal. I don't know. That's just my outside perspective on the NBA. I don't know if that's right. I'm sure there's some NBA fan somewhere that's yelling at me. It's like, you're an idiot. And it's like, oh, okay.
I miss Jordan.
Yeah.
I miss Jordan.
I miss Jordan too. All right. A lot of other comments. Thank you, everybody, for being here. We do have to get on with the show, though, because we have a lot to get to, like I said. So our first thing, and we probably won't spend too long on the first three things just because we have other stuff to get to, but our first one is that Rutgers is still looking for a defensive coordinator. The rumors was that Chris Hewitt Sr., who has been the Ravens defensive back coach and passing game coordinator for about 10 years, was going to fill that role as he and the Ravens parted ways. There was some thought there, especially with the signing of his son, Chris Hewitt Jr. I think it was last week that he signed with Rutgers. And so there were many rumors about that happening. And right now, there's just not a whole lot of information. Like you ask any Rutgers insider on who is going to be the next defensive coordinator, and really nobody has any idea who it's going to be at this point. So it's just a whole lot of mystery going on here. I mean, Zach, you tell me if I'm wrong or not. I have to believe that Greg Schiano has somebody in mind. They were pretty active in recruiting in January. I mean, they got 3 or 4 commitments in January alone. So I have a good feeling they're probably going to get more into the defensive coordinator search at that time, like I feel most teams are with the recruiting dead period starting here in February. You think I'm on the right track there, or you have a different thought?
I'm sure they have guys in mind. I mean, I would imagine Schiano being a defensive minded guy, he's got a couple of guys in the pipeline that he's thinking about. The problem is, and I think you're seeing this across the board, is that there's I think a lot of coaches who are kind of counting the cost before jumping back into college. Because in the NFL, you don't have to deal with recruiting, you don't have to deal with NIL, you're dealing with grown men. So I understand why Hewitt would stay in the NFL, stay in that realm, despite the fact that his son being at Rutgers. So I don't think it's a matter of Greg Schiano not having somebody in mind. I think the question is, can you get somebody who's willing to deal with this wacky new world?
Yeah, for sure. And I think you need a special person at certain programs like this. Like if you're going to be at Rutgers, You need a special kind of coach who is going to understand you're not going to go out and get the 5-star athletes, right? That's
Yes.
not what Rutgers is going to major in. What they're going to major in is they're going to major in going out there, taking kids that maybe had bad 40 times, and maybe that's not really who they are, and turning them into something much better than what they appeared to be in the recruiting rankings. I mean, look at Chris Hewitt Jr. That was kind of the whole thing with him. It's like, hey, this is a small guy who should be faster than he is, but he has a really bad 40 time. And it's like, okay, well, 40 times are also kind of meaningless, but some people do think they are meaningful. I tend to believe they are meaningless just because most high schools do it by hand, and by hand is so inaccurate. I mean, you're literally talking about like a tenth of a second, a one of a second. Like you are talking about such minimal time, and the time that it takes for you to see a guy cross and then click the clicker like 40 times, unless you're at an NFL combine or something like that. And then on top of that, you have to run that same speed in pads, like with a reaction time as well. You can be the fastest guy in the world, but on defense, if you don't have reaction time, game over. You're not going to be very fast. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, if you're going to be the defensive coordinator at Rutgers, you need to be a special kind of defensive coordinator to do that. And I think Rutgers and Greg Schiano in particular knows that. He's going to find that, and it'll just take time to get there.
Yep.
So
Good thought.
all right, next one. Matt Rule. I don't know how long the conversation this will be. I don't know how many thoughts you have on it, Zach, but Matt Rule is considering no spring game this year. And one of the reasons why he cited why he doesn't want a spring game is because of tampering going on, and the idea that some teams might see the talent that Nebraska has on their team, maybe their backups or maybe a player that hasn't played yet and they're going to start this year, and then they would go out and try to tamper with that player. Now, we saw Minnesota didn't have a spring game, or if they did have a spring game, it was very low attended. I can't remember exactly what it was. Maybe Dave or somebody can, help me remember that. But I know Minnesota didn't have a spring game last year. It wasn't for those same reasons. This is the first time I've heard of a coach say we're not having a spring game or considering not having a spring game because of tampering and the idea that somebody might see the level of talent that your players have on your team. What are your thoughts on this, Zach?
Yeah, I can understand Matt Rule's thinking in we need to stop the tampering thing. I mean, Nebraska had what 30 players leave this past offseason. They had a bunch leave last year as well. So like I understand like this is a legitimate problem for Nebraska in particular. Of all the people to consider canceling a spring game, though, Nebraska is like one of the few places I would say don't do that. Like 60,000 people went last year. And so, like, you want to talk about being able to get more NIL money into that fund? Taking away one of the best ways to connect with your fans feels like a really stupid idea. And so maybe I'm wrong. Like, we're hopefully going to talk with the guys over at Common Fan later this offseason to talk about their feel about the state of the program. And I think people know we like Rule. We like Matt Rule. We like what he's done and what he's doing. We like his track record. This feels like a bad move to me. Like, I think there are other ways to try to mitigate it. I don't think this is the right one.
I think Matt Rule is falling into the paranoid like coach thing right now, where it's like if anybody sees my players, they're gonna want because Nebraska just lost a ton of players to the transfer portal, and yes, some of that was you had a lot of walk-ons. You're trying to get down to 105, all that kind of stuff. And I do think that's probably stressful on Matt Rule too, because Matt Rule is quite frankly going to have to cut players this cycle in order to get down to the 105. And for a program like Nebraska that's been built on walk-ons for as long as they have, that's going to suck for him, and that's going to suck for the program, the culture, all that kind of stuff. So I think more than anything, this speaks on how much Matt Rule was feeling the pressure, because you're exactly right. This is one of the best attended spring games last year, and it's going to continue to be one of the best attended spring games because those fans are crazy and those fans want to see it. And I'm not saying crazy is a bad thing. I'm saying crazy is a good thing. But those fans want to see this kind of stuff, and if Matt Rule takes that away from them, I think you do more damage to your fan base and to the kind of excitement for your season from your fans than you do with potentially another team seeing your players play out there. You know,
Yeah.
maybe you tell Big Ten Network not to televise it. I can't remember if Nebraska's was televised last year or not. Almost all of them were, so I think it probably was. It was at the very least probably on Big Ten Plus. But as far as I'm concerned, maybe you ask Big Ten Network not to televise it, but like you got to put on a spring game if you're Nebraska. Like if this was Rhode Island, sure, cancel your spring game, whatever. You're probably getting 5,000 people there for it, if that. You're you're Nebraska. You get 60,000 people to your spring game. You got to have it. And I see a bunch of people calling Matt Rule a whiner and like a baby and all this kind of stuff. And I get it. We get on coaches and stuff like that for kind of doing these things that are kind of a little out of the box. I don't know if he's being a whiner or anything like that. I think he's just super paranoid and super concerned about everything going on in college football right now. Especially, I don't know how you couldn't be with seeing what's happening with Wisconsin right now and everything that's going on with Xavier Lucas. We've not really got an update on what's going on there, but that's like worst case scenario for a program to go through, right? Like you don't want to get into a legal battle with a player leaving your program who signed to be in in the NIL, and then he's going somewhere else because the team tampered with him. Like, that just sounds awful.
Yeah, and I think just to be clear, the people are on both sides of this in the chat. I think if they cancel it, I don't think it's like the sky is falling, right? Like I don't think the NIL is going to dry up. I think maybe what we're both saying, correct me if I'm wrong, is this feels like a misread from Matt Rule. And like I feel like he's done a lot of things right with that fan base after being burned so much by Pat Riley and especially by Scott Frost. This feels like the biggest misstep in terms of judging the fan base and like fan base relations. And that matters. Like NIL, public support, it matters. And you want momentum to continue to fly high. I would agree if someone says it's unnecessary. I might agree with that. But in the short term, but in the long term, I don't know. I think it could sour some relationships, and I'm not sure that's the best way to go about his concerns.
Yeah, no, I think you make a good point. A couple comments really fast, and then we'll move on. 2025 Natty Champ says, "Does Nebraska charge for their spring game? Do you think that would help things, Zach?"
Possibly. I don't know. Do they charge? I don't know.
I don't think so. I think it's if it's not free, I'm pretty sure the money goes to a charity or NIL, one of the two.
Yeah.
I don't know if they charge right now. Maybe there's a Nebraska fan can tell us if they're charging right now.
Yeah.
And then the other one is Terry saying Matt Rule is delusional. Again, I don't know if he's so much delusional. I just think he's probably just paranoid at this point.
Yeah.
Maybe that's delusion. We can call that, I guess. But I just think he's paranoid at this point. And there's so many coaches that are just terrified of tampering and losing their players and everything else. It's just, it's a lot to go through. So, Joe says if Rule cancels a spring game, then Nebraska has a poor season. That's a terrible look. Yeah, Nebraska's also had poor seasons before, and they've had spring games. So, did it ever make a difference? I don't know.
Yeah.
All right. Let's get to our last one here, and then we'll get into a bigger topic, Zach. Minnesota's defensive line coach, Winston. I'm probably going to botch the name. I apologize. D. Letubadur, maybe? Off to the NFL to Arizona. He's been with the team for a while now. I think he was a graduate assistant in 2021. I read from 2021 where he was a GA at Oregon to 2025, potentially or 2025, a D-line coach in the NFL. That's quite the rise for a guy in the college football coaching business to go from GA 4 years later. You're a position coach of the NFL. We have raved about Minnesota's defensive line and how it's been better than a lot of people give him credit for. What he's been able to do with them has been spectacular. This is a pretty big loss for Minnesota in my mind. Obviously, if the NFL wants you, that means you're doing something right. But in my opinion, like this is kind of just the cost of doing business, right? You get good coaches on your staff, and other teams or the NFL is going to come calling for them. And right now, the Arizona Cardinals have come calling for Justin Fry and Winston, and those are two coaches that had good years this past year. And PJ Fleck is going to be out there trying to hire a new D line coach, and we'll see if he can make it happen.
Yeah. I mean, it is a tough loss. I think Minnesota, I think defensively across the board, they have been so good at developing, recruiting on that side of the ball and developing. So key position for them. They had a number of guys, Jaw Joyner being the last of them, that were really good players on that defensive line.
Yeah. Jaw Joyner's the first one that comes to my mind, but there's others as well. So we'll see what happens. I think 24/7 put a few names out there of different guys, but at the end of the day, this is a position coach battle. We'll see what happens. I don't know if I blame PJ Fleck. That's what some people were doing on like the message boards. They were kind of blaming PJ Fleck and saying like, how can't you keep your staff together? If this was Rutgers again, coming in and taking your defensive line coach to be a defensive line coach, sure, I would get blaming PJ Fleck, but and I'm not saying anything bad about Rutgers. It's just Rutgers isn't the NFL. But if the NFL comes calling, like, I don't know. I don't think you can blame the coach. I think it's just the NFL is the NFL, and I don't think this is Minnesota didn't pay him enough either and stuff like that. Like, maybe you could have gave him a DC job or something with Corey Heatherman moving on, but I don't think you want to take that risk with somebody that's so young.
Yeah, I think we kind of ripped on Minnesota for not paying assistants. I think that was much more apparent with the coordinators than it is for a position coach. And you kind of got to start at the coordinators. Like, if you're not paying your coordinators well, like, you're not going to make as much at the position level. And so they need to raise the salaries for all their position coaches, but it starts with their coordinators.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Zach, we get to the big topic now. Got a lot of people in the chat. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Our big topic is that Ohio State loses Jim Knowles, their defensive coordinator, Justin Fry, their offensive line coach, Chip Kelly, their offensive coordinator, and then it looks like their defensive line assistant. We're really getting deep into the weeds here, but their defensive line assistant coach, Alan Clark. I almost said LaCharles. Alan Clark. So Ohio State losing a number of good coaches on their staff that fans have felt good about this past year. Justin Fry got a little bit of criticism for his recruiting, but I don't think anybody can argue what he was able to do with the amount of injuries on that offensive line and still having them play at a high level. The development, you had the Remington Award winner, you had a guy elevate to a first-round pick in Josh Simmons, you had possibly another guy elevate to a first-round pick in Donovan Jackson. So, I mean, Justin Fry did a great job this year. Jim Knowles obviously had the best defense in the country. Chip Kelly, the numbers weren't as impressive, but when that offense was needed, they came through in almost every single game this year, especially in the playoffs. That offense was spectacular. So, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, these are big losses. I know pretty much every Ohio State show out there is basically doing like, what happened? Who are we going to hire instead? If we want to go down that route, we can, Zach, but I would much rather go down the route of like, what does this mean for Ohio State's future? Like, we can talk about who they're going to hire, but can Ohio State stay at the national championship contender level for next year, even by hiring all these, hiring for all these assistant staff coaching jobs and stuff like that. So, Zach, just give us your first thoughts on Ohio State losing all these assistants, and then your thought on if Ohio State can kind of stay at the top with hiring of their new assistants.
Yeah, I think so. John Jacobs in the chat. It's like, well, of course, Ohio State has nothing to worry about. And on one level, I think he's right. there are maybe 2 programs, 3 programs in the country that recruit like Ohio State. That's Texas, Georgia, Alabama. Oregon's getting there. And so like those would be the 5. And then I think Penn State, Michigan, certainly, Michigan has that four-game winning streak. So like they can kind of rub it in Ohio State's face a little bit. But like aside from that, and I think we saw it in the playoff, right? From a talent perspective, nobody recruits better. And Ohio State has been one of the best teams in how they've utilized the transfer portal. So talent acquisition is a lot of this. I don't think, I think we talked about this a little bit. I am not all that concerned about losing Knowles. Like, I think he's an A+ guy, right? I'm not saying that he's a bad, but like, as long as they get someone who is competent, which is not always something they've been able to do, but as long as they get someone competent, you're pairing them with Caleb Downs. I think that is going to be okay. A lot of smoke around Randy Bates, the defensive coordinator at Pitt, possibly taking that job right now. Justin Fry is the same thing. Like, he did a great job developing, but his Achilles heel was recruiting. And so he was not a perfect offensive line coach. He was very good, and he proved himself this year, but he deserved a lot of the criticism too. And so, it was a bit of a mixed bag. I'd argue he was like a B+, A-. I think he's actually a better NFL coach because, again, you don't have to deal with recruiting in the NFL. And that was his Achilles heel. You have to be a good recruiter. I think the big loss is Kelly. And not because he was a fantastic play caller. He was at times, but there were times he got into ruts and the Michigan game being the biggest one. But the biggest thing that Kelly allowed Ryan Day to do was to be able to be the CEO. We talked about that a lot in the offseason. A lot of people have talked about it in the offseason. He trusts Chip Kelly. And now Chip Kelly's gone. And so what's Ryan Day going to do? Is he actually going to trust someone else fully as the offensive coordinator? I think that's the big question.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that's a huge piece of this. Obviously, if you're on the outside looking in, you're thinking to yourself, like, Ohio State, brings in offensive coordinators, defensive coordinators, stuff like that. Like, it's going to be fine. And I get that. My response to that would be, look at what Urban Meyer did after his national championship. Urban Meyer lost, some of his assistants and at least one coordinator. Did they lose to the defensive coordinator after that? I think it was just Tom Herman, wasn't it?
Chris Ash was still there for another year.
Okay,
Tom
he was
Herman
still there.
left.
But they hired their offensive line, was it Warner, their offensive line coach, as their, and they had a better team in 2015 than they had in 2014. Guys were older, guys had come back, and they didn't know what to do. Like, it was a bad situation. The coaching was bad, quite frankly. You can have all the 5 stars in the world, but if you don't put those guys in the right position, you can still contend for the Big Ten. And I think Ohio State will contend for the Big Ten next year. But you're not going to get far in the playoffs if you have bad coaching, because pretty much every team in the playoffs has 5-star players on their team, and one of these teams is going to come up and get you, right? We saw the example of really good coaching with Indiana last year, right? They took a bunch of players that came in from the G5, had really, really solid coaching, instilled confidence into those guys, and they were able to accomplish much more than we've really ever seen a team like that be able to accomplish. And I know people say the schedule, stuff like that. I'm not trying to take anything away from them. Like, they accomplished a lot last year, and it was in Curt Cignetti's first year doing it. So to me, coaching matters, and Ryan Day has shown he has a track record of hiring good coaches. And to me, that is kind of the piece of this that, as an Ohio State fan, should make Ohio State fans feel good, is that Jim Knowles left. That does stink. That's probably the biggest one to me, just because I wonder if it was a little bit unexpected. But you have the opportunity with a guy like Matt Guerrieri, who knows that defense inside and out, to step into at least a co-defensive coordinator role. Chip Kelly, I don't care who you are. Like, if you thought Chip Kelly was sticking around for longer than 2 years, like, you're crazy. Even if they didn't win a national championship. Chip Kelly, went to Ohio State because he couldn't get an offensive coordinator job in the NFL or a head coaching job in the NFL last year. And so he came to Ohio State so that way he could show off himself as an offensive coordinator again and make it back to the NFL. Justin Fry was not happy at all this year with the fans and everybody else. So did I think Justin Fry was going to leave? I wasn't going to predict it. Am I surprised he left? Not at all, because number one, he wasn't getting along with the fans, and number two, he he doesn't like recruiting. Like, it's pretty obvious he doesn't. So he's much more of an NFL guy in my mind. But the way I look at this is Ryan Day has on his hands an opportunity to hire 3 new coaches that are all better recruiters. Maybe they're not as good like schematic coaches, but they're all better recruiters than these guys because, quite frankly, these were probably the 3 worst recruiters on Ohio State's football team. And so you have that opportunity to do that. On top of that, Ryan Day, a good hire. Like, I don't know. The question for me is not so much can Ohio State be a top 5 team next year? I still think they can. To me, the question is, will Ohio State still be ranked in the top 5 come next year? I think if they make some splash hires in the coordinator position, I think they will be. But if they just go and elevate guys in the program, I don't think they'll be a top 5 program in the preseason, which I know that matters to some people and some people it doesn't. It's fine, but that's just kind of my thought process.
I think, well, I would not be surprised if they're still top 5, just with, you've got the 2 best players. Some people will think that this is a controversial statement. I don't think it is. Caleb Downs and Jeremiah Smith are the 2 best players in college football. And they're both playing in scarlet and gray.
And coaches are going to want to come coach them.
Yes. That being said, I think they'll get a top 5 ranking for that alone. But you get Texas week 1, you get Penn State, you get Michigan. Like, I think there's a real possibility that they take lumps early on. And that the question is, to me, the top 5 thing is important, but I think even more important, can they round into form so that by the end of the season, they can get into the playoff? Because I think they're gonna drop at least 1, maybe 2 early, because you're breaking in a new quarterback, you're breaking in pretty much a new
Texas
defense.
game week 1 is going to be really tough.
Yeah. I mean, both teams are replacing guys, but Ohio State's replacing a lot.
Yeah.
So I think that's maybe more of the question is, does their coaching staff, and with the coaching turnover now, you have to implement new systems. I think I'm more curious, does the coaching staff and can they all coalesce by midway through the season? And can the offensive coordinator draw up a game plan that says throw the ball to 4? Because really, that should be easy. But we've seen sometimes it's not.
Yeah, it should not be hard to drop a game plan to throw the ball to Jeremiah Smith, but that has apparently been more difficult than maybe some people would think.
One thing I will say though, and then we can move on, unless if you have other things to say.
No, that's fine. We can move on after that.
I do think. So I've thought about like the Chip Kelly thing and the trust. I think Ryan Day, and I've said this for a while, Ryan Day has always done better when he's coaching as the bully rather than as the underdog. He just won a natty. He looks as joyous as I have ever seen him. Like, he's going on talk shows. He's talking to Kelly Clarkson. He's playing at softball, like at softball practices. He doesn't have bags under his eyes right now. I think that dude's coming for blood regardless of who's on the coaching staff next year. And I think it reminds me of when he first came in 2019, where it was like, oh, he's not going to do, like, he's got to replace a legend at Urban Meyer. And he's like, bet. I kind of get that vibe right now. And now that he has the backing of a national championship, it's almost like, all right, I've done this before. I don't have anything else to prove now. Game on. So I don't know if that, like, I'm curious to see if that continues to play out, but that's the vibe I get right now. I don't get the sense he's concerned.
Yeah, no, I don't think he's overly concerned. I think the reason why, and then we'll hit commercial after this, and then we'll get into like the Pat Coogan, Rocco Spindler, Victor Singleton talk. I think for me, the nice thing about this for Ohio State is every single one of these guys has a person on the staff that can replace them. Like you're not in a situation where you have to go out and get somebody. So if you strike out all your options, move Matt Guerrieri up to the defensive coordinator. If you move out of all your options for offensive coordinator, you move Brian Hartline up to offensive coordinator. If you lose all your options for offensive line coach, you move Tim Drevno up to offensive line coach. I guess Alan Clark is probably the one. I don't know if they have another option in house, but I would assume finding an assistant, defensive line coach is probably not going to be the most difficult thing in the world, especially when you have the level of talent that Ohio State has. So,
yeah.
All right. All right, everybody. We will do a commercial really quick, and then we'll come back. Do as Sonny is saying here, hit the like button for us guys. It's just real quick. We'll do a commercial. When the commercial's over, I expect us to have more likes. That's all I expect. So hit the like button. We'll be right back after this commercial.
Have you ever wanted to watch all 22 film, that film the coaches watch? Well, now you can. Introducing the Coaches Film Room. Over at Minutes to Sports, former college coach Zach Smith breaks down film of the most relevant teams in college football with a bit of a Big Ten lead. It's not free, so you'll need to sign up for the Colonel tier, which is $25 a month, but I can attest to you that it is far more worth it than that. With about 4 to 8 games per week, this is worth so much more money, not to mention Zach's analysis, making you a smarter football fan. Go check it out. The links are in the description, minutestosports.com. You won't be sorry.
Back here on the Big Ten Huddle. Thank you for joining us. Please do like and subscribe. We appreciate everybody who's here. If you want to be a member, the membership option is available now. You will get a week or a monthly call-in show just for members to be able to call in and talk to us and give us your thoughts and everything that goes on there. You get your comments prioritized in the chat as ones that we bring up. And then also, before every single episode, I will put out a post asking if there's anything you want us to talk about. You can make one suggestion for us to talk about, whether it's real quick or a big topic. We will try to fit that into the episode. So thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. All right. Next, we have, I forgot to change the thing there. All right. So we're going to do Pat Coogan, Rocco Spindler, Victor Singleton. So Stay with us if you're in it for that stuff. Pat Coogan to Indiana, a huge piece for this Indiana offensive line. I mentioned him in my very first video when I talked about this stuff. I said there wasn't any smoke, but it seems like a big, a genuine fit. It seems like something that where Pat Coogan could go to Indiana, get playing time right away. He would be a great piece for him. Not only is he, did he have a good season playing this year, but he's also a very energetic player. He's a leader. He's somebody that, brings a lot of experience to this Indiana offensive line. Zach, when you and I talked about the offensive line in the transfer portal, we said, you need to go out and at least get guys who are backups on Power 5 teams. Well, Indiana went out and they got a guy who was a starter on the national runner-up this year. Now, you talk to a Notre Dame fan and they say he's not going to be a starter next year. Whatever, if and buts, whatever. But at the fact is, he started for this team last year when they made it to the national championship game. So for me, that's a huge get for Curt Cignetti. Their offensive line is in much better shape this year than it was last year, and they played well last year for a good amount of the year. It was really at the end of the year when things started to get more dicey. But you got Carter Smith coming back. You've got Pat Coogan, Zen Mikulski, who he got hurt last year for playing for Ohio State, but he's still an Ohio State caliber offensive lineman. We'll see if Curt Cignetti, maybe him getting full-time reps in the offseason will help him be, a little bit more developed and ready for that. We'll see, but I really like what Indiana did by getting Pat Coogan here, and I think it was a really nice ad. What do you think, Zach?
Yeah, I mean, I think you look at Indiana's transfer class, and they're recruiting in the transfer portal like you would expect a mid to top tier team would, which is they're not settling, they are getting legit prospects like a Mendoza at quarterback, like Pat Coogan. And listen, I don't care what Notre Dame fans say. He maybe he is the 7th or 8th lineman. right? I don't care because he played well for a team that bulldozed guys in the playoff. Like you're talking about guys that were beat up by this Notre Dame offensive line, Georgia, and by the way, the Indiana Hoosiers and Penn State, and even for especially for the quarterback run, they had some nice plays against Ohio State. So I get that Notre Dame is saying like, "Hey, we have a lot more depth," and they do, and I think that's a trademark of Marcus Freeman's program. Good for them. This is a big thing. This is a big deal for Indiana, especially beating out other teams that were slated. I think it was Michigan who was in on both Coogan and Spindler, and for Indiana to go out beat other Big Ten programs for Pat Coogan. Again, we keep saying it, but the star power, I think, matters just as much as the talent. Like name recognition is going to do wonders for Indiana and for Curt Cignetti. Probably the biggest thing is, can they temper expectations so that they don't overpromise and underdeliver? Because right now, I think what they're bringing in, it could overpromise something that could then be disappointing. But right now, I think what you're seeing is Indiana's star continues to rise.
They do. Thank you, John, for looking up those stats. Appreciate it. I do remember looking those up as well. I did not mention them, but 1 sack, 2 QB hits allowed in 438 blocking snaps. That is impressive. Terry is saying you underestimated us, JR. You had us third in both of them. I'll be honest. I don't know if I ever said third for Pat Coogan. If I did, I don't remember saying that, so I apologize. But I do remember saying Rocco Spindler they were most likely not going to get because I felt like they needed more of a center, and I felt like, or I heard that Rocco Spindler was looking at being either a guard or a tackle, that he wasn't so much interested in center. But I do remember saying, like, if Pat Coogan is interested, you need to go after him because you need to get him. But as far as I'm concerned, like, this is a huge ad, not just for the blocking and the ability and everything like that, but a leader, somebody who's going to be able to communicate better with the fellow players on his offensive line. Like we saw what happened last year, and I'm going to use him as an example because I know there's a lot of Ohio State fans in the chat, but with Ohio State last year, you had a guy who was super inexperienced at center, 2 years ago, and he did not know how to lead that offensive line nearly as well. You bring in Seth McLaughlin, who was the Remington Award winner. That offensive line looked 10 times better, not because Seth McLaughlin was, 10 times the better blocker than Carson Hinsman was. I mean, he was a better blocker. I'm not, saying he wasn't good or anything like that. But he also ran checks at the offensive line. He also was a leader. He was also working with those guys in practice every single day. Like, that kind of stuff is the stuff we don't see, and I think that is the kind of stuff, not just the blocking and the ability from Pat Coogan, but it's that kind of stuff to me that is going to be so valuable to this Indiana team because they already have a good offensive line coach. What's his name from Wisconsin? He came over to Indiana. I apologize, can't remember his name. Somebody put it in the chat. I know there's an IU fan that knows his name, but he was at Wisconsin for
Bob Bostad.
Bob Bostad. Okay, that's right. Bob Bostad, yeah, John Jacobs right there. Thank you. He was at Wisconsin for a while, and then he went back to Wisconsin for a year. Then he went back to Indiana. Like he's going to be able to coach Pat Coogan up, and this is going to be a good offensive line next year. It's not a question of will they be a good offensive line against every team. They're going to be a very good offensive line against every team. It's going to be, are they going to be able to hold up and withstand against the best defensive lines that they see, right? Are they going to be able to hold up and withstand against Illinois? Are they going to be able to hold up and withstand against Oregon? Do they play Oregon this year? I believe they do.
Yep.
Oregon. Are they going to be able to hold up and withstand against the other like top tier teams in the Big Ten that they play? Because if we're all being honest, like that was one of the biggest issues against Ohio State. Now, playing at Ohio State and, the noise and everything like that is obviously a factor, but you get what I'm saying. This was the missing piece for a lot of their issues last year in their bigger games. And Curt Cignetti has gone out and he's done his best to rectify it and make it better. And I applaud Curt Cignetti for that.
Yep. I think one thing I'll mention, I think Indiana will be a better team next year, but I think their record's going to not be as good. And the reason people are putting in the chat, they're at Iowa, they're at Oregon, they're at Penn State, they're at Wisconsin. Or no, they're not at Wisconsin. They host Wisconsin.
And so they're home against Wisconsin.
Yeah, sorry. I misread the schedule. But they get Illinois at home. Like it's a tougher schedule than a year ago. And as we want to be fair here, like Indiana deserved to be in the playoff, but like the strength of schedule criticism was valid as well. And the Big Ten scheduling this year is a lot tougher. And that doesn't mean that Indiana can't do well, but I think the reality, the degree of difficulty is definitely higher. And so if Indiana, say, is 9-3, I don't think that means that they took a step back. I think it could mean that they're actually a much better team. They're just now taking a step up in competition. If they go 9-3 and get a big win on the road, that actually might be more impressive than what they've done this past year.
Yeah, no, I agree. Billy Tuesday is absolutely right. Illinois, Indiana is going to be must watch, must
Banger.
see TV.
Banger.
And John, thank you. Yes, love the cup. You too can buy your own the Big Ten Huddle cup in the merchandise shop store and everything like that. So go check it out. Other T-shirts there as well. No, but I totally agree with you, Zach. I think Indiana is going to be a better team next year than what they were. I'm not as sure the defense will be as good next year just because they do lose some key interior players on the defensive line, CJ West, guys like that. So I do think they lose some there. Mikel Kamara is coming back, so that's huge. But we'll see if the defense can still play up to that same level because you still got D'Angelo Pons back, and you brought in a good number of defensive backs. I think Johnson, he left because you brought in other, quite frankly, better defensive backs who are going to play over him. It stinks. You don't want to see a guy leave, but that's the reality of college football, which is if you can find guys better than what you have, you bring them in. And that's the other demeanor that I love about Curt Cignetti is that he's not afraid to do that. He's going to make this team as best he possibly can. And so if that means looking at a guy on, that is a pretty good corner, but bringing in a better corner, that's what he's going to do because he wants to win.
Yep.
Yeah. All right, let's see if there's any more thoughts in the chat or anything. No, nothing much else. Just a lot of talk about the schedule. And I think some people I never meant it this way, and I think you're the same way, Zach. Some people take like the easy schedule for Indiana as like an insult on Indiana. I never meant it that way. I just was acknowledging that there are not as many good teams on Indiana's schedule as there are for other teams. I mean, you and I still advocated all season long. Like, even though they don't have as hard of a schedule as some other teams, like, they are still looking impressive in these games. They are still doing a good job of taking down opponents. Like, this is still a very good team. You can see how well coached they are. You can see how well they work together. The Michigan game was a little concerning for some. There were obviously some concerns in it, but I also like the fight they had in that one. So yeah. Anything else on that before we move on?
I think sometimes I think sometimes we start to, how do I put this? So like, I understand why people see it as an insult because it almost starts to devalue what you accomplish. And that's not what we're doing. I think some people use it that way. But I'll take the Nebraska win, for example. I mean, they crushed them 56-7. And that became less about Indiana's dominance and more about, well, Nebraska sucks, which they didn't suck. Like, they were a decent team. Like, if you looked at all the metrics, you looked at all the, the ratings, they were a middle of the road team, and they stomped them. They smoked them, but they got no credit for it. I shouldn't say they got no credit for it, but I think people started to look at Nebraska and Washington and teams that were bowl teams and basically like, oh, well, it doesn't matter that you smoked them because they suck. And it's like, no, like, I don't think that's what I think there's a difference between talking objectively about a strength of schedule versus devaluing your opponent so much that you're denigrating anything you accomplished. And I think we want to fight against the latter while also acknowledging the former. Like, Indiana's schedule was not great last year, but also like they beat a bunch of teams that were, in past years they would get smoked by. So like, I think we have to acknowledge, yes, the degree of difficulty was not what most other teams had. And also, Indiana in previous seasons would have gotten smoked by a lot of those teams. And instead they smoked them.
Yeah, and that's really what we were saying from the beginning is we were like, guys, you might say like, oh, these teams stink, but these are still teams that would have smoked Indiana last year or 2 years ago. Like, so we can say, the schedule isn't as good, but this is also a Big Ten issue. This is the last thing I'll say on this, and then we'll move on. This is also just a Big Ten issue, though, right? Like the SEC, if South Carolina goes and blows out Missouri, nobody says like, oh, Missouri must be terrible, Like everybody looks and says, wow, South Carolina is this great team. Look at how amazing they are. They're fantastic. Look at how well they played. But in the Big Ten, if Indiana beats Nebraska, it's like, well, Nebraska's terrible. It's like, no, they're not terrible. They destroyed Colorado. They played a tight game against Illinois. They had opportunities to win that game. Now, yes, they squandered them, but still, like that was a very good game between those two teams. Like Nebraska's not a bad team, and they weren't a bad team last year, but because Indiana beats them so good, people look at that and they're like, oh, well, Nebraska stinks. No, they're not. They don't stink. If you watch that game, Matt Rule never relented, and he tried to win the game the entire time. Maybe that was a little foolish by Matt Rule, but at the end of the day, like, this wasn't a game where they just got spanked the entire time. This is a game where Nebraska remained aggressive and Indiana remained aggressive too. So,
yeah. And it was, I'm getting poked by the chat. They did it with a quarterback with a torn ACL, right? Like, so that matters.
Thank you, Terry. We have a comment from Pit Snipe. I think that's what it says.
Yeah, Pit Snipe
Husker. JR was on the money and had the details on Spindler. He is in. Thank you. I did my best to do as much research as I possibly could. I think that's a good transition for us. Go over to Rocco Spindler, Nebraska lands Rocco Spindler. Huge ad for Nebraska, if I do say so myself. I think that Rocco Spindler is going to be a big addition to this team, not just for his ability, but the way that Nebraska can now kind of reshuffle their offensive line. They had a center issue. Justin Evans should be able to move over to center now if they want. I think from what I've heard, Rocco Spindler is also going to possibly get a few reps at tackle. That was one of the reasons why it was so important for him to want to get to spring ball. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Michigan told him he wasn't going to be able to participate in spring ball because it was so late, and that was a contributing factor on why he didn't go there. Nebraska was very proactive in making sure that he could play in spring ball, though. Pitt was as well, but ultimately Nebraska a better destination, and I think they offered more NIL money too, so credit there to Nebraska for being able to do that. But as far as I'm concerned, like, this gives Nebraska options on their offensive line. They're not stuck in a scenario where it's like, well, we have no center. I guess we have to move somebody else over now. No, you can move Justin Evans over. Rocco Spindler can come in at guard for you. Or you can have a young up-and-comer come up and play guard, and you can move Rocco Spindler, possibly, we'll see, over to tackle for you. I mean, the opportunities here are there. It just kind of depends on how spring practice goes and what these guys do. What are your thoughts on the addition of Rocco Spindler to Nebraska, Zach?
I mean, it's huge. Because what's the thing that Nebraska has to do to jump from the 6-7 win range to maybe the 8-9-10 win range and Big Ten championship contention? Protect your young quarterback. Let him develop. Give him time. Well, what do you need to do that? You got to build your offensive line. You got to do what Notre Dame did, right? Which is have an offensive line that goes 8, 9, 10 deep. You got to do what Ohio State did. That's what Nebraska's doing now. And you're getting, again, high-level guys where they not only are able to play their position well, but they can move around a bit, which helps your depth, helps your ability to deal with injury, gives you new options when things go awry. And you need that to keep your young quarterback upright, which is one of the biggest issues they had this past year. So you're getting a proven guy. You're getting a guy with championship pedigree. I mean, I feel very similar in saying this with Pat Coogan. Probably the one difference is that Nebraska is an established brand, but they are trying to find their footing under this new regime. And I think it's showing that despite what we were saying before about Matt Rule, I'm not sure this is a great hire, or not great hire. I'm not sure this is a great decision to do the spring game stuff. But like this is why you bring in Matt Rule, to stabilize and to build the right way. And that's exactly what this is.
Yeah. I mean, this is what Nebraska needs as a head coach for all of, everybody wants to say about Matt Rule and whatever people say thing about coaches. Matt Rule is a stable piece for this Nebraska program right now, and being able to have that is so valuable, not just for adding recruits, but adding transfer portal guys, everything else. It's huge. HWF3 asks, who's Nebraska's tough games? Nebraska actually has a pretty favorable schedule next year. They open up at Arrowhead Stadium against Cincinnati. That's kind of their big out-of-conference game. And then they get Michigan at home, and Michigan, depending on what they do with their quarterback situation, that could be favorable, as Bryce Underwood will still be kind of, working in there. Or if it's Mikey Keene, that would, I don't know if that would be better. We'll see. We'll have to see how they play. But then they really don't face, and I'm not trying to disparage any other teams here, but they don't face a top-tier program until week 13 at Penn State, and then they have home against Iowa to end it. So your away games here in the conference are Maryland, Minnesota, UCLA, and Penn State. Like, those are pretty manageable for Nebraska. I don't see them winning at Penn State, but also Illinois took Penn State down to the wire at Penn State last year. So if Nebraska can be anything close to what Illinois was last year, which I think they can, you could see something like that happen there. But I also think Penn State's going to be better next year than they were last year. So,
yeah.
I
think Michigan. Well, I was going to say Michigan's defense is still going to be Michigan's defense.
They just don't have the first round star players on there.
Yeah.
And that's going to be interesting to me, is see how does Michigan do without those guaranteed kind of first round star players on their defense. If their development's really good, they'll be fine, but we'll see. And then PK asks, wonder if cheating scandal hurt Michigan. I think he's asking in the Rocco Spindler case. Not from what I've heard. Honestly, I don't think any of that stuff is going to affect anything until an actual punishment comes down, and the punishment will have to be, I mean, if they get rid of the national championship, that's not going to hurt anything at all. Again, the fans saw it. They still went through it. Everybody felt it. It's what we've been saying here for a while. The only thing that could possibly hurt stuff is if they get some kind of bowl ban. And if it's a 1-year bowl ban, I don't think that does anything. If it's a 3-year bowl ban, maybe. But at the end of the day, I think everybody has in their mind every time Michigan loses, and I'm not saying PK does, but I think everybody has in their mind, if Michigan loses out on a transfer or a recruit, it's because of the cheating scandal and stuff. I don't know if it plays that much of a factor into it. At least it hasn't from what people have told me.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, there's too much uncertainty.
Yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty right now. So.
And we know why there's
I said Maryland Wolf.
That's fair. But I say we know why there's uncertainty, right? We know why. Because the NCAA stinks. Yes. Buy the T-shirt. Buy it.
Yes. I don't have that picture loaded up anymore, but if I did, I'd show it. All right, let's see. Anything else on this Rocco Spindler stuff? I think it's pretty straightforward. I think it's a really good ad for Nebraska. I think that it allows them to, have some versatility on their offensive line. And I think, Elijah Pritchett, as much as some Alabama fans say that Elijah Pritchett was not a good ad because he was terrible last year, guess who Alabama fans thought was terrible last year, and he turned out to be the Remington Award winner. Seth McLaughlin. The fact is, Alabama had a terrible quarterback. The fact that he's going to get drafted in the NFL is just absolutely wild to me. Nobody should be looking at Jalen Milroe and say that's a guy who can play quarterback in the NFL. He's an athletic freak. He is not a quarterback. Nope. He is a worse quarterback than Anthony Richardson was at Florida. And that's saying something.
Yeah, that's hard to. Philip,
don't tempt us, Philip.
Yeah, Philip. That.
Zach will get off on a tangent if we let him. So
yeah, okay. Put it down. Put it down.
Let's go over to happier news, Zach. Victor Singleton. Okay. Illinois lands
fired. No, I'm sorry.
No, sorry. Illinois lands top Ohio recruit Victor Singleton. Obviously, his recruiting varies from place to place and stuff like that, but this is one of the best players in the state of Ohio. I follow Ohio State recruiting very closely, so it's very easy for Ohio State fans to say here like Ohio State cooled on him. I hate when people say that, even though when there is some truth to it, like. At the end of the day, you really don't want to lose any of your players from your state, top tier players from your state to other schools, especially Big Ten schools. So I think this is a fantastic ad for Illinois. I think that Illinois had the opportunity here to kind of take a shot across the barrel. What I will say, even if this isn't, a hurt, against Ohio State, this is a hurt against Michigan. Michigan wanted Victor Singleton very bad. I don't know what the NIL offer was like or anything like that, but I know Michigan really wanted Victor Singleton. The fact is, Victor Singleton wanted to go play for Illinois, and I think it's a testament to Illinois marketing themselves, probably having some better NIL as well, probably some more funding for the football program as they've seen more success. That's kind of how that happens there. But an underrated part of this Illinois team under Brett Bielema and Aaron Henry is they're fantastic at developing DBs, safeties, quarterbacks. Like they do a fantastic job of that. When Ryan Walters left, a lot of people thought Ryan Walters was the one that did that. And I'm not trying to take anything away from Ryan Walters. Ryan Walters did do a good job, but Aaron Henry was the one who, if you ask, people kind of on the inside, like he was the one that was working with Devin Witherspoon and some of those other guys the most. And really Ryan Walters kind of got the credit for it. And Aaron Henry, nationally at least, didn't really get that credit for it. Now, I'm not trying to disparage Ryan Walters. Ryan Walters still, I think he's going to do a good job at Washington. I think he's more of a defense coordinator than a head coach right now. I think that's obvious. But as far as I'm concerned, like this is a huge ad for Illinois. And I think this is speaking to the fact that recruits and other people out there nationally are starting to recognize it wasn't just Ryan Walters at Illinois. It was Aaron Henry. It was the development. It was a lot more going into getting these players ready for the next level and being essentially a DB factory that's not a top tier program yet in college football.
Yeah. And I think we talked a lot about Indiana being maybe better but having a worse record. Illinois might be better and have a better record. And like Singleton is probably not going to play in this, but I think this recruit, this ability to pull this off, I think is speaking to the fact that Brett Bielema is truly building something special in Champaign. He's got the core, like he was able to re-recruit his guys to come back all on that offensive line, Altmaier, a lot of the defensive pieces on the back end. And this, I think the fact you're able to go into Ohio, beat other Big Ten teams. Now they're going to have to fight to keep him. A lot of people are saying, well, he's going to flip. I wouldn't assume that. I would not assume that at all. Just because money talks does not mean it talks louder than development for a lot of these players. And Illinois obviously was able to offer him something, and they can offer him something a lot of schools can't, which is we can get you to the NFL. We can make you a top 3 round pick. Look, like a lot of schools can't do the look, right? Illinois can. Over the past 4 years, ever since Bielema's been there, they are producing NFL draft picks, high NFL draft picks in that defensive back end. And so, and they, with Michigan, they can sell the uncertainty. With Ohio State, they can sell like, hey, you're going to get on the field pretty quickly. And then they can sell to every other Big Ten team. Are they going to get you in the league any faster? No. So I just think Illinois is in great position with Singleton. It matters that they're the leaders in the clubhouse now. I get it. 10 months. We'll see. But I think it's big. And I think Illinois is going to have the type of season that you're going to actually see more recruiting momentum than anything else. Because you look at their schedule, somebody said 10-2. Listen, 11-1 or 12-0 is not out of the question either.
Yeah. They get Ohio State middle of there. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I said it in one of my videos. I'm going to pick Ohio State to win that game. I'm not, like, unless Ohio State, barring like a terrible collapse, I'm going to pick Ohio State to win that game. But still an away game. Like, it's still an Illinois team that if they're undefeated by that time, they could be really hot. Like, this isn't Indiana coming to Ohio State where it's going to be a huge raucous crowd and it's going to really affect the offensive line. I still think Ohio State obviously has better talent and they should win that game, but like, don't put it past Brett, like, or Bert, sorry. He's going to give him a good game at the very least.
Yeah. Well,
So.
and to that, just from like someone put it, they're physical in the trenches. They went toe to toe with we make fun of the SEC, but that South Carolina team was good. They beat them.
It's one of the best defensive lines in the SEC.
Yeah, and they went blow for blow with them, right? They are a really good team. They bring back most of their lines. I mean, you look at the schedule. Ohio State's going to be their toughest game, and then at Indiana.
It's either at Indiana or at Washington. I'd say at Indiana, but Washington does have a very good home field advantage, and we'll see what that Washington team turns into next year. But I tend to lean at Indiana there as the harder one. 11-1 is not out of the question at all for Illinois. 12-0. It's kind of like we talked about Rutgers last year. Could Rutgers go 9-3? It's like, well, yeah, they can. I don't know if I'm going to pick it, but they can. Kind of the same thing here. Like, nobody's going to laugh at 12-0 for Illinois. At least nobody who knows what's going on in Big Ten football is going to laugh at 12-0 for Illinois.
Desmond Howard will laugh at 12-0.
Desmond Howard doesn't know anything that's going on anywhere.
We know. That's why I said that.
Yes, thank you. So I think the other part of this here is like, the is he going to flip conversation that, obviously there are people in the chat talking about that, Fisherman and other people. And I think that there is a chance here that he does flip to somewhere else, but there's also just the chance here that I forget who Illinois fans said, but the coach on their staff was one of the very first people to offer him, and Illinois is willing to kind of, play the recruiting game that Victor Singleton wants to play. The hope for some programs is that eventually he gets away from that, but you also look at this Illinois program, you can come in and play early. You're going to get solid development, and you're going to compete in the Big Ten and be a double-digit win team, possibly, the few years that you're there. Mm-hmm. So you look at it, it's not completely out of the question that he would stick with Illinois. Is there a chance that he flips and goes somewhere else? Sure. Yeah. Michigan can offer a bag that's bigger than what Illinois offers. Ohio State can come in and, start really trying to tout things up and make themselves look better. You never know what an SEC school can do. Oregon could always come in at some point and try to do something. There's always a chance. Corey Parker. Thank you, Sonny. There's always a chance. But I wouldn't say it's for sure. Yeah. I think Victor Singleton chose Illinois because Illinois not just, was willing to play the game with him, but there are other factors there, personal factors there as well, like Corey Parker offering early that really made a difference on him. So I think that's huge for Illinois. I think it speaks to their development, and I think that if Illinois' defensive backs have another good year this year, Xavier Scott and those dudes back there, like, you're going to see more top DBs in the nation looking at possibly going to Illinois.
Yep.
So really good stuff for Illinois. We'll see. I'm sure we'll talk about it more. We might not talk about it much during this season, just because it's a lot to try and do recruiting and everything else. But yeah, we'll see. So, all right, Zach, let's hit a break, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about the next Big Ten coach to win a Big Ten title that has not won one before. So a lot of stipulations there, but we'll come back. We'll talk about it. Stay with us. Home Field is your go-to destination for premium collegiate apparel with a passion for comfort and a flair for vintage design. Home Field brings you gear that is comfortable and stylish. With over 150 colleges to choose from, Home Field digs deep into the archives, uncovering forgotten logos, iconic mascots, and legendary moments to create one-of-a-kind apparel. Use my code TBTH for 15% off for new customers, or use my link in the description. Back here on the Big Ten Huddle. Thanks for joining us. We want to ask you, please remember to like and subscribe, and also become a member if you would like to do so. Members get offers to be able to have a call-in show with me and Zach once a month. We still need to schedule that here for February, but we will schedule that. We'll let you all know, and then also choose topics that we talk about on the show, and also get priority in the comment section for us to bring you up and stuff like that for chats. So we appreciate all of our members. We appreciate all of our viewers. Thanks so much for watching, and this is going to be our last segment. Next coach to win their first Big Ten title. All right, so the coaches who have already won a Big Ten title in their career, not necessarily with the team that they're currently with, but in their Big Ten career. You have Dan Lanning, who won it for the first time this year. You have Brett Bielema, who won it at Wisconsin. What was it, 2 or 3 times? Was it 2 times?
I want to say 3. Remember. I want to say
2 or 3.
Yeah.
Ryan Day won it twice. There's, some argument on that second one there with the rules and everything like that, but, they let him in, so he won it. James Franklin won it once, and then Kirk Ferentz won it twice, I believe. So outside of those, I think your contenders here are, and this is in no particular order, Zach, Sherrone Moore, Curt Cignetti, Lincoln Riley, Luke Fickell, Matt Rule, Jed Fish, Jonathan Smith, PJ Fleck, Greg Schiano? ? What are your thoughts, Zach?
Yeah, it's 3. He won 3 from 2010 to 2012.
Okay, thank you.
So these are my 5. My 5 in order. Cignetti, I think, is the clear number 1. I just think what he's doing in recruiting, in the transfer portal, I just don't think Indiana's going to go away. I think 2, Matt Rule. Again, I think he's building Nebraska in the right way. And so it may not be for a few years. And remember, it's who's the next Big Ten coach to win a title that never has. So, I'm not expecting that either Cignetti or Rule wins one this year. I think Day, Lanning.
Real quick, Philip, Franklin won it in 2016.
Franklin. Yeah, I think Franklin could win it this year. Those are your top 3 or 4, and they've already won it, right? So Cignetti, Rule would be my top 2. My 3rd has an asterisk by it. Sherrone Moore. And it's only if the penalties are not severe for what happens.
Okay, so let's break this down for just a second. For each of those 3 that you said, which, by the way, my top 2 are the same as your top 2, Cignetti, then Rule. And it's close between those 2 in my mind. Philip, Kirk Ferentz won it twice in the early 2000s, I believe. 2004, 2005, I think.
He won a when they still shared. They won in 2002. Yeah, 2002.
But we'll count those. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm choosing Cignetti and Rule more because of their coaching 2002 and 2004. Thank you, John. More because of their coaching acumen and what we've seen from their coaching ability in the past and what they've shown recently. I think Matt Rule here recently, you might argue a little bit more, but I think Nebraska had a good year to start the year. They just need to find a way to expand on that. I think his willingness to go to Dana Holgerson in the middle of the year was huge. I think that's a big thing for a coach to be able to do, especially somebody that's been as close with you as Marcus Satterfield has been. So But when it comes to Sherrone Moore, like, and I'm not trying to be rude to Sherrone Moore here, but if I'm choosing Sherrone Moore, it's more because of where he coaches and less about the coach he is.
Well, and I think you have to consider that, right? Like Michigan can still acquire talent differently than most other programs in the Big Ten, right? Maybe outside of Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon. Right now, I'd say Michigan is up there with them, and you're seeing that. Like, I mean, they just dropped a bag to get Underwood, and they're still producing defensive talent. Now, will they continue to? I think that's the big question, and that's why I have a big old asterisk at 3 with Moore. Because if they have a postseason ban, Moore might get fired. We're not sure, but we're not going to go down that road. I'm just saying there's an asterisk there. I have Lincoln Riley at 4 because again, I don't think he's the best coach, but I think he can acquire talent. And then 5, this is my sleeper pick above Jed Fish, above a few others. I have Jonathan Smith because while I think there are things about his coaching that I'm like, we've seen Michigan State be able to rise up under D'Antonio, and he's done some nice things in the offseason. And like, it wasn't a complete waste of a season this first year. Like, we knew it was going to be tough sledding for Smith in year 1. I think he is trending in the right direction.
Brian's comment made me laugh. Where does none of the above rank? Can't rank that one, Brian. Sorry. I have to rank the coaches. Yeah, so I disagree with you. I have Jed Fish number 3 for me. And I was hesitant to put him at 3 not because of his coaching or the school or anything like that, but because I do wonder how long he's going to be around for. So 3 through 5 for me were all coaches that I think can do it, but I don't know exactly how long they're going to be around for. I think Cignetti and Rule are going to be around for a while.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what led me to go 1 and 2. Coaching acumen, obviously, but also then be around for a while. I don't think Jed Fish is fired anytime soon by any means, but he just has a tendency to kind of move around in his career. He's never been any place for longer than 2-3 years, I think it is. So for me, like, I think Jed Fish can do it, but I just don't know how long Jed Fish actually sticks around, you know? So that's kind of hard. Lincoln Riley, like, I could see Lincoln Riley, if this season doesn't go well and recruiting doesn't improve with Chad Bowden there and the new recruiting staff and stuff like that, I could see Lincoln Riley trying to get to the NFL as like a quarterback's coach or something like that, like just trying to get out and trying to do something someplace else. And then 5th for me is Sherrone Moore. I am concerned about Sherrone Moore getting suspended. Like, you and I talked about, like, oh, this stuff that happens to Michigan and stuff like that. Like, that excuse he used on, like, oh, I was just so mad at, Connor Stalions. How could he do this to the program? It's like, dude, that's a terrible excuse. That is one of the worst excuses I've ever heard of. If he knew about everything that was going on there and they really want to punish somebody, which I think is likely, they're probably going to want to punish somebody rather than the program, because ever since they punished Ohio State hard, they've kind of been like, well, do we want to punish future players for past, events? Then, like, you're going to punish one of the coaches. You're going to punish somebody that was actually involved in it. And so that's kind of my reason there with Sherrone Moore as well. And also, too, like, I'm going to talk about this with college football with Sam next Sunday, but, like, Michigan didn't get hardly any good offensive linemen in the transfer portal, which I get it. Like, maybe you're saving some transfer or some NIL for like recruiting and stuff like that because you want to build up from that. I think that's a good idea. But they lost a lot of offensive linemen in the transfer portal, and they did nothing to try and bring somebody else in. I mean, they brought in Brady Norton and what was it, Langdon Hatter or something like that. I know his last name's Hatter. I forget what his first name is. But those guys are from Ferris State and Cal Poly, like FCS programs. So as far as I'm concerned, like, Sherrone Moore obviously can coach up a good offensive line, But if you're not giving him pieces for a good offensive line and the NIL isn't there to bring in those guys for the transfer portal, I don't know. Like, did they spend all their money on Bryce Underwood? I don't think so,
I
but
mean,
maybe.
they may have spent a majority of it, which I think so. This was an exercise that was very difficult, JR, because I think it was it Brian Davis who's like none of the above.
Yeah.
Because I think like Cignetti and Rule, I think are the only two you can really say like definitively could have a shot in the next 5 years. More,
Yeah.
if more,
I think Luke Fickell is a good enough coach to possibly get there, but he's not brought
Not
the
with-
Wisconsin program up to where it needs to be.
Yeah, if he doesn't improve this year, he's going to get fired. And
Yeah.
that schedule is brutal.
It is brutal.
They
should be singing his praises if they go 7-5.
Yeah, but I don't know if they will.
They won't, but they should. That
Yeah.
schedule is brutal, dude.
I think the thing that's more difficult. So like Jed Fish, I think he could get Wisconsin or Washington rolling. I think the problem is if they go 8-4, I think he takes another job.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, which I agree
And I don't
with
think you jump from 6-6 to 11-1 or 10-2, right?
Yeah. So I know we disagree. Jonathan Smith, I think, will be at Michigan State for a while.
Yeah, I just question, is Jonathan Smith in the amount of time that maybe some other guys going to adjust to that, to that kind of recruiting and development that Michigan State had when they did go on that run, where they won the Big Ten and they made the playoffs, like doing that kind of stuff. Like, I do think there's going to be an adjustment period for Jonathan Smith coming over from Oregon State, and he brought some guys with him, which is great. But like, if they had a better recruiting class this past year, I'd feel better about it. But they didn't really do all that well in recruiting this past year. So that says one of two things for me. Number one, you either don't have the NIL to be able to do that, or number two, you're still unfamiliar with the grounds of the recruiting. It's going to take you a few years to really kind of build that up. So, but I also see what you're saying is like these other guys are probably going to be out and Jonathan Smith's going to be around. So you can only win a Big Ten title if you're there.
I'm trying to remember what Michigan State had a decent portal class, which I know is not the same.
Yeah, they had a decent portal class, but I think you need to have a recruiting class with solid 4-star players in it at least to
that's fair.
Build up to win a Big Ten title. Yeah.
That's fair. That's fair.
Fishman says MSU will be as good as Childs as long as they give him help. I mean, they got Nick Marsh for him, and the offensive line I think was better than some people gave him credit for last year. It obviously needs to improve. It wasn't anything spectacular, but they performed well against some really good teams last year. But as long as he has help, Childs is going to be a star. He just needs to get the help to do it. He has crazy arm talent. When seeing the ball come off his hand is just wild.
It's yeah.
So, all right. Any comments on PJ Fleck, Greg Schiano? Any chance for them to win the Big Ten, you think?
I think it would take a similar pathway to Indiana this past year. Like you catch lightning in a bottle, you have the right schedule. I think that's especially true for Greg Schiano. I think PJ Fleck could make it work. I just think Minnesota.
I still think he can hold on to his coordinators long enough with what they're paying him.
They got to pay better. I also like Minnesota. I don't know. Minnesota is this weird program where I'm like, they have a tradition-rich like history with championships, but I just feel like they're stuck in like at a plateau of like 8-4 or 9-3. And like, I just don't know what it's going to take for them to get over the top.
Yeah. Got a number of people asking about schedules and stuff. I mean, I have this over here. I can share like the Big Ten's official thing. Actually, hold on one second. Before I do that, let me not show all my notes that I have everywhere. Because if I show my notes, I'm gonna get yelled at by so many people in the chat. Hold on. I have like numbers written on there. I'm like, this is how good this team is. This is this team, and if somebody sees the wrong note, they're gonna flip out. Okay. So this is like the whole schedule for next year. I mean, as far as that, so Terry was asking about Iowa. Iowa's got their normal out of conference, two bad teams in Iowa State. They're at Iowa State. Then they had some of their bigger games, Indiana at Wisconsin. There's thoughts to Wisconsin not being very good next year, but still Camp Randall's a tough place to play. I was going down the wrong one. Penn State, Oregon, at Nebraska. Like, it's not an easy schedule for Iowa. It is manageable because Iowa is good at beating their rivals, so they could sweep Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Nebraska next year. Like, they've done that a number of times. But when you got Indiana, Penn State, and Oregon on there too, like, those are all home, which is a plus. But
Yep.
I don't know. That's gonna be a pretty daunting task for him next year.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's a tough schedule.
yeah. Fishman says Iowa has a tougher schedule than last year.
Yep.
Yeah, because they got some of the bigger opponents on their schedule.
Iowa should have, like, with their schedule, 10-2 was very, very much on the table, and they blew it.
And that's kind of what I was getting at when I said that. Like, I've gone both ways with Iowa next year. I've said that Iowa could do two different things next year. They could either go 6-6, 7-5. I mean, there's 6 losses on this schedule: Iowa State, Indiana, Wisconsin, Penn State, Oregon, either USC or Nebraska. Like, there's 6 losses on this schedule. I'm not saying I'm going to pick them to lose 6 games, but there's 6 losses there. Or they could capitalize on what they have, upset. I don't know if it's an upset, but take down Iowa State at Iowa State, win one of Indiana, Penn State, Oregon, sweep their rivals. Like, if you do that, then you're 10-2. Like, Iowa to me is going to be one of the most interesting teams to watch next year.
Yeah.
With what they do with their schedule.
I'm going to be very curious about their first 2 road games at Iowa State and at Rutgers. Because, like, Rutgers, you didn't mention Rutgers as a loss, but, like, Rutgers brings back.
Oh, yeah, at Rutgers too, yeah.
A good
I didn't
chunk.
think about that.
Like, I don't know. Rutgers just feels like they had so much hype coming into this past season. Now they're kind of laying in the weeds. I actually wonder if that's better for them.
Yeah, that might be better for him. We'll see what the new defensive coordinator hire is too. That could be really beneficial. Terry's saying USC has a tough one too. Yeah, I'll be honest. Zach, you and I put out those rankings of teams to make the playoffs. I think we had USC 6th. I remembered they had Notre Dame on the schedule as well. I was like, oh crap. I don't think I should have done that. This schedule for USC is pretty daunting. At Illinois, at Notre Dame, at Nebraska, at Oregon. They do get Iowa at home, but still Iowa's no slouch. Michigan at home. And that's a little bit later into the season. It's after a bye, but still, like, that's gonna be tough. Like, I don't like you could see 6 losses on here for USC as well.
So same as last year.
Yeah, pretty much.
I mean, is it as difficult as it was last year? Because I mean, they had LSU and Notre Dame out of conference last year.
Yeah, but they didn't have. I'm trying to remember the schedule last year.
They had Penn State.
They did have Penn State, but that was at home.
They had Michigan at Michigan. They had Wisconsin.
Did they have Oregon last year?
No, they didn't have Oregon. So it's definitely
it's probably more difficult.
Top heavy.
Yeah,
from
John Jacobs is right. Wisconsin's is brutal too. I think honestly the toughest schedule, at least conference wise, like, and I guess out of conference too because they have Notre Dame. I think Purdue has the toughest schedule in the Big Ten.
Good luck, Barry Odom.
Like, you got Notre Dame Illinois, at Minnesota, which I know some people have their thoughts on Minnesota, but still at Minnesota, at USC, that's a tough place to play. At Michigan, Ohio State, at Washington, Indiana. Like they'll be better than a 1-11 because they have those two cupcakes that start the year, but they might not win another game after week 2.
Yeah,
I hate to tell Purdue fans that, but like cherish your basketball season because it doesn't get any easier next year.
Yeah, it's
And they got Notre Dame on the schedule for like the next 2 or 3 years.
yeah. Remember when we both picked, or was I the only idiot that picked Purdue to upset Notre Dame this past year?
No, no, we did that together, and that was us. Having some silly season.
To be fair, Purdue won their first game by like a bajillion, and they looked actually pretty decent.
And Hudson Card looked like a good quarterback, and
Yeah.
I don't think he ever really was a bad quarterback last year. I just don't think he had. I mean, he was a bad quarterback at times, but he also never really had any help. That offensive line was terrible.
Real quick, and I know we'll probably wrap up soon, but
Yeah, we'll probably wrap up after this.
everybody's talking about the hard schedules. There is certainly an imbalance of scheduling, but most teams have hard schedules, which I think is actually good for the sport. Like, I know people are ripping Ohio State for having 2 losses and still winning the national championship. But like, you look at the Super Bowl, and I know college football isn't like the NFL, but if you look at the NFL, the Eagles have 3 losses, the Chiefs have 2. Like, they're playing for a championship. I never understood the appeal, not the appeal, but like the obsession of undefeated seasons. I think they're amazing when you get them. But like, I would much rather have a schedule where you have Indiana actually playing Illinois, Oregon, Penn State this year. You have,
as long as you still make the playoffs, yes.
Yeah. Like that's why I like the expanded playoff is like Ohio State gets Texas, Illinois, Penn State, Michigan. Like, that's so much better than like 11 games of Grambling State and then Michigan at the end.
It's funny you bring up Grambling State, Pit Snipe Husker ass. What the heck is OSU trying to prove going Texas and Georgia back to back? And I thought, they don't play Georgia. They have Grambling State right there. It does look exactly like the Georgia logo, and I'm sure it looks a little different color wise and how small it is. Now that's Grambling State, but that is hilarious. If they scheduled Texas and Georgia back to back to open their season, that would be so awful. Oh my!
Or would it be brilliant?
No, it would be awful. It would be awful.
Not if they beat both of them.
Sure, but yeah. So it's LOL. My bad. I'm old and still. That's all right. We're here for you. So, all right, Zach. Any other thoughts on the schedule before we move on?
No. This is good.
All right.
Philip makes a very good point. There's no Kent State on the schedule.
Darn. We won't get to see Kent State this year. We'll have to go see some action to do that.
Yeah.
That's funny. All right, Zach, enjoy your vacation. Enjoy Disney and everything down there.
Yeah.
Everybody, we will be back on Tuesday night. It will be me and Jeff McMichael. Me and Jeff did a video earlier this year on returning players. So if you check that out, you'll see Jeff on that one. Jeff has 5 truths about the Big Ten that he's going to unveil to all of you, and he's going to get my reaction and you guys' reaction to those. That's going to be fun to do. And then on Sunday, next Sunday, it is Super Bowl Sunday, but we think the Big Ten is better than the Super Bowl, so we are still going to go live. Okay, it's probably not better than the Super Bowl, but still, you have the opportunity. It might be. You have the opportunity to still watch live. Big Jeff, he says, Big Jeff knows what he's talking about.
Yeah, he does.
We're excited to have Big Jeff with us. And then college football with Sam will join us next Sunday on Super Bowl Sunday. So we're gonna have fun with that. I'm gonna get some of college football with Sam, his thoughts on the Michigan transfer portal class, and then if you guys have any questions about Michigan or anything like that, I know you guys had a good amount of stuff in here tonight that you were wondering, so you guys get an opportunity to ask, and we'll have a good time. So Zach, anything you want to get to before we get out of here?
No, I'll see you guys in a couple weeks, but yeah, love interacting with you guys, and appreciate y'all. So take care, guys.
All right, very good. Yes, take care, everybody. We appreciate you being here. We appreciate you listening, and we hope you have a great one. We'll see you Tuesday.